Hey everyone, and welcome. If you're just starting your pharmacy journey, you're going to find out pretty quickly that emulsions are, well, everywhere. We're talking about everything from lotions to liquid medicines. This is one of those fundamental concepts you absolutely have to master. So let's dive in and really break down the science of how they work.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the absolute basics. What even is an emulsion? Then we'll get into the two main types. After that, we'll open up the pharmacist toolkit and see how to tell them apart. Then we'll look at all the ways they can fail, and trust me, they can. And finally, we'll tie it all together and talk about why this is so critical for your career.
But before we get into all the technical stuff, just think about this for a second. What on earth do salad dressing, the moisturizer you use every day, and some liquid medicines have in common? Well, the answer is this brilliant and sometimes kind of fragile science of emulsions. They're all just mixtures of oil and water that have been convinced to play nice with each other.
All right, let's lay down that foundation. What exactly are we talking about when we say the word emulsion?
Okay, that sounds super technical, right? Biphasic liquid preparation. But let's just break it down. Biphasic just means two parts, or two phases, and immiscible is a fancy word for liquids that just don't mix, like oil and water. So an emulsion is just one of those liquids getting smashed into tiny little droplets, we call them globules, and scattered all throughout the other one. That's it.
Now here's where it gets interesting. It's not just about what you're mixing, it's how you mix it. And that gives us two totally different blueprints for our emulsion. Knowing which is an absolutely critical skill for a pharmacist.
In an oil and water, or OW, emulsion, you've got these tiny little oil droplets just floating around in a whole lot of water. The easiest way to picture it is like tiny oil islands in a big water sea. Most of the lotions you've used are probably OW. That's why they feel light and absorb so fast. Now flip that, and you get a water in oil, or WO emulsion. This time, you've got little water islands in a big oil sea. You'll see this in heavy-duty barrier creams, and that's why they feel so much greasier. That C part is what we call the continuous phase, and it determines everything.
So, let's say someone hands you a bottle of some generic white cream. How in the world do you figure out its true identity? Is it oil and water, or water and oil? Well, for that, we have a really cool little diagnostic toolkit. Let's walk through the four main tests.
First up, we have the simplest one, the dilution test. And it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You take a little bit of your mystery emulsion, and you just add some water to it. What happens next tells you everything you need to know.
And here's the logic. If your emulsion is oil and water, its C, its continuous phase, is water. So adding more water is no big deal. It just mixes right in, and the emulsion stays stable. But if you try to add water to a water and oil emulsion, where the continuous phase is oil, it just can't handle it. The whole thing falls apart, and the emulsion breaks.
Okay, next up is the dye test. This one is really neat because it's so visual. We use a specific dye, like scarlet red, that has one important property. It only dissolves in oil. So we add a tiny drop to our emulsion, put it on a slide, and take a peek under the microscope.
So what do you see? Well, if the little floating droplets, the islands, all turn red, you know for a fact that those droplets must be oil. And if you have oil islands in a water sea, you've got an oil and water emulsion. But if the entire background, the whole sea, turns red, then you know the oil is the continuous phase, and that means you're looking at a water and oil emulsion. So simple, right?
The third tool in our kit uses a bit of electricity. And it works based on a really simple principle you probably already know. Water conducts electricity, but oil is a terrible conductor. It's an insulator. And we can totally use that to our advantage.
So, picture this. You take a couple of electrodes, connect them to a small light bulb, and dip them into the emulsion. If the continuous phase is water, you've created a bridge. The electricity can flow through the water from one electrode to the other, completing the circuit, and boom, the bulb lights up. But if the continuous phase is oil, that bridge is broken. The electricity can't flow, and the bulb stays dark. It's a really clever and effective test. And for our final test, we're going to use something you might not expect. UV light. This one, the fluorescence test, works because a lot of oils have this cool property where they naturally glow, or fluoresce, when you hit them with ultraviolet radiation.
And just like the dye test, the pattern you see gives you the answer. You shine that UV light on it, and if you see a bunch of tiny glowing spots against a dark background, you're looking at the oil droplets fluorescing. That means it's oil and water. But if the entire field lights up with a continuous glow, well, that means oil is the continuous phase, and you've got a water and oil emulsion.
Okay, so we know what they are, and we know how to identify them. But here's the thing about emulsions. They are fundamentally unstable. They're temporary. Oil and water want to separate. It's their natural state. So let's look at the different ways an emulsion can start to fail.
This breakdown usually follows a predictable path. It often starts with something called flocculation, where the little droplets just kind of get together in these loose, reversible clumps. Next comes creaming. This is where those clumps either float to the top or sink to the bottom. Think about the cream rising in a bottle of old-fashioned milk. Then things get more serious with coalescence. Here, the droplets aren't just clumping, they're actually merging and becoming bigger droplets, and you can't undo it. This is a slippery slope that leads to breaking, which is total separation. And then there's this weird one, phase inversion, where an OW emulsion can literally flip and turn into a WO emulsion.
Breaking, which is also called cracking, is the end of the line. This is the point of no return. The oil and the water, the aqueous phase, have completely separated back into two distinct layers. No amount of shaking is going to fix this. For a pharmaceutical product, this is an absolute catastrophic failure.
So why did we just spend all this time talking about tests and how things fail? Because as a future pharmacist, this isn't just some abstract science lesson. This knowledge is absolutely central to patient safety and making sure your products actually work.
Let's just tie it all together. Emulsions are amazing because they let us do things like deliver an oily drug in a liquid that's actually pleasant to drink, or deliver moisturizers in a cream that feels good on the skin. Those identification tests, those are your quality control tools. And understanding how an emulsion becomes unstable is how you guarantee that the dose a patient takes on the last day of their prescription is just as safe and effective as the dose they took on day one. Because if an emulsion has broken, a patient could get a spoonful of all oil or all water, a dangerously incorrect dose.
So I'll leave you with this one final thought. The next time you grab a lotion, a cream, or a liquid medicine, and you see that little instruction that says shake well before using, you'll know exactly what's going on. You'll understand the powerful forces of instability that simple instruction is fighting against. You're not just shaking a bottle anymore, you're actively reversing that inevitable journey back to separation.